Pleiadian humans, came here as warrior colonists about 3,500 years ago. There were 50,000, and they were from 7 different human planets. They landed in the region we call Europe, and we think of them as European whites. They evolved as different people with different European languages on 7 different worlds, none of them from Earth. This is where the German, French, Italian, Spanish, Polish, Hungarian and Slav languages came from. All other European languages, including English, have evolved here.
Research that we're hearing today that shows half of all Western European men are somehow related to the Egyptian pharaoh King Tutankhamun. CTV's Marella Fernandez here with more on this. Marella, what's up with this?
It's really interesting, actually.
Yeah.
So this is coming out of Switzerland, and the researchers there have found that not only do half of Western European men have this connection, genetic profile connection, but 70% of men in Britain, which is astounding. But they all have the same genetic profile or same ancestry as King Tut from Egypt way back when. And here's what's really shocking about this: less than 1% of modern-day Egyptians have that same connection. So it kind of makes you wonder, well, if he's Egyptian, but the ancestry isn't Egyptian, how did it evolve? Which way did it move? And it looks like it didn't start in Egypt, but it evolved and went to Egypt and may have started in Europe, and that's why all the Europeans have this background.
The official story is that New Zealand was uninhabited until 800 years ago. The oral tradition, however, of the Maori tribes, the indigenous Polynesians that live in New Zealand, tell of legendary blonde fairy people living in hobbit-like burrows and red-haired giants that also roamed these islands in ancient times. The well-known Kiwi legend speaks of a time when the first canoes arrived, only to find that there was already a race of blonde-haired fairies that lived in the forest, and they were called the Patu Paiare. And they would come down to the sea to fish, and this would usually take place in the evening at night when it was dark or very misty. And as the legend says, one early morning, one of the Maori were said to have witnessed blonde people fishing, and I presume they were startled and they took off, but they left behind one of their nets, which from then on was used by the Maori themselves, who attribute this method of fishing technology to these little fairies. There's another legendary race of fair-skinned people from New Zealand with golden hair, and they were agriculturalists. They carved out amphitheaters, and these people were said to be tall, had very white skin, and were likely the origin of the famous tattoos that you see.
Fully facial tattoo, which was only for the ones of high rank. People think everyone got tattoos in the old days. They're wrong. 5 to 10% at the most. You had to be something to deserve it, especially a facial tattoo. The people that were basically here before we got here, okay? Well known to be, tall, fair-skinned, definitely not little fairies. They're still around. They're all still blonde. Whether people real or not, they were. We've got a family, who descend from them.
There are modern blonde populations in New Zealand called the Waka blondes, and they're Maori, but they have a distinct, different lineage than the Polynesian people.
We've got people in New Zealand who were once described as the Waka blondes. A lot of them actually have very traceable whakapapa that's much, much older than any of the Polynesian Maori whakapapa. And they know where they came from. I know one individual, an old kuia, a very dignified lady, who claims to come out of Persia. And the area that she's talking about, very close to India. And when we did DNA analysis on this lady, it shows a high incidence of her blood group or her DNA in the Persian area. so she's quite correct. But then the second big block, if you like, of people that share her DNA are found in Peru.
This is very interesting, as it concurs almost exactly with a Maori legend recorded over 100 years ago by ethnologist Elsden Best when he was living amongst the Tuhoi people. The legend tells us that their ancestors in times long passed away, 165 generations or around 3,500 years ago, migrated from a hot country named India. The cause of this exodus was a disastrous war with the dark-skinned folk in which great numbers were slain. This war was recorded in the Indian epic known as the Mahabharata. The legend continues on to describe their voyages which eventually took them into Polynesia. They crossed the oceans to Tafiti-Roa, a long skinny land believed to be Central America, and then on to Tafiti-Nui, a very large land, South America. And from there they ventured into the scattered isles of the Pacific.
Hiroshi Oshima, the former Japanese ambassador to Germany during World War II, believed that the noble castes in Japan, the daimyo and the samurai, were descended from gods of celestial origin, which was similar to the Nazis' own belief that the Nordic race did not evolve, but came directly down from heaven to settle on the Atlantic continent. A swastika crossed by two arrows, within a shield and surmounted by a royal crown on an orange background, was used as the coat of arms of the samurai Hasekuru Tsunaga in the early 17th century. The swastika symbol is seen frequently in Japan. Its ancient ties to Buddhism's and pre-Buddhist philosophies' civilizing spread throughout 3/4 of Asia is well documented. The symbol is depicted facing both directions and most common in a spiritual context, such as on Shinto and on other temples.
We call that the European colonization. They came here to Earth because they and their planets were at war with an invading race called the Reptilians. The Reptilians had invaded 2 human worlds and exterminated the humans there. This was a war of no quarter. The warrior colonists, Pleiadian space forces, had thoroughly destroyed 4 large reptilian hives and numerous sub-hives here on Earth. Their warrior colonists were landed to complete any additional destruction of reptilian forces here, and to hold the planet if the reptilians re-invaded. Unbeknownst to the Pleiadian space forces, the reptilians had a 5th major hive under the ice in Antarctica which was not detected and not destroyed. The reptilians sent diplomatic signals and a truce was established for planet Earth only. You ask why a truce would apply? Most of the population of humans on Earth were slave races created by the reptilian allies who called themselves the Anunnaki. The Pleiadian space forces did not know that a reptilian hive still survived and agreed to a truce for Earth only. The warrior colonists were landed and appeared to thriving. The slave races created by the Anunnaki were a mix of Anunnaki reptilian DNA genetically engineered into various indigenous primates from all over planet Earth. The Anunnaki came to Earth originally to mine gold and diamonds, but only came with about 400 males. They needed slave labor, performed the mining, and desired to have women as sexual companions. Many of the primates used to create Homo sapiens did not survive the process and became extinct. This is what happened to the Neanderthals from what we call Europe. It also explains why there was no indigenous population to contest the landings of the Pleiadian warrior colonists. Unfortunately for the Earth, the conditions of the truce were to sever all communications between the Pleiadian space forces and the warrior colonists. They were left to fend for themselves and soon turned to fighting amongst themselves and, eventually, conquering the known world. We call that the European colonization. The Pleiadian space forces did not know what to do with the millions, now billions, of slave populations created by the Anunnaki reptilians and decided to collect data and study the problem before taking any action. Meanwhile, the reptilian hidden hive began expanding itself into the 5 original hive locations again. Alsace-Lorraine in Europe, near Perth in Australia, south of the pyramids in Egypt, in New Mexico, USA, and Antarctica. Okay, there is a huge problem here. When the Anunnaki and reptilians created these slave races, they included a kind of telepathy that is unique to the reptilian hive system. We call this mind control today. So, as the reptilian hive expanded into all 5 hives again, the reptilians were able to use mind control on the slave races with greater and greater success. This was something the Pleiadian space forces were unaware about until recently, since the year 2000. There have been dramatic developments in the wars between Pleiadian humans and the reptilians and Anunnaki Grey allies. Without going into detail, the Pleiadian humans defeated the reptilians in several large space engagements and learned how to defeat all reptilians' forces here on Earth in a stealthy way. They jammed the hive queens.
Well, Justin Trudeau, meanwhile, keeps tumbling from one crisis to the next. The Canadian Prime Minister is still fighting the Freedom Convoy. And in the process, he's making more people angry, it seems. So who has Trudeau managed to anger this time? The Hindu community of Canada, apparently. It began with a statement. Trudeau was defending his government in Parliament. This was over the Emergency Powers Act. We've been telling you about it. The Canadian Prime Minister has declared a national emergency over the protests. The opposition cornered Trudeau in Parliament. A Conservative lawmaker said the Prime Minister has lost his way. Do you know how Trudeau responded? Watch this.
Positive, optimistic, hopeful vision for public life isn't a naive dream. It could be a powerful force for change. If Canadians are to trust their government needs to trust Canadians. Those are the words of the Prime Minister in 2015. These people, very often misogynistic, racist, women haters, science deniers, the fringe. Same Prime Minister 6 years later as he fans the flames of an unjustified national emergency. So, Mr. Speaker, when did the Prime Minister lose his way? When did it happen?
You're right, Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Conservative Party members can stand with people who wave swastikas. They can stand with people who wave the Confederate flag.
Well, the MP who quizzed Trudeau is Melissa Landsman, a lawmaker of Jewish origin, a descendant of Holocaust survivors. She says Trudeau, quote-unquote, singled her out, accused her of supporting Nazi sympathizers, and she's demanded an apology, not once but twice. But Trudeau chose to leave the parliament. And it wasn't just Trudeau who made such statements. Jagmeet Singh, another lawmaker, said the very same thing. Allow me to read a quote for you. This is what he's saying. Swastikas and Confederate flags have no place in Canada. We have a responsibility to make our communities safe for everyone. It's time to ban hate symbols in Canada. Very well. Hate symbols have no place in our society, Canada or any other country for that matter. But by making these statements, the Canadian Prime Minister may have further divided his country. Hindu groups in Canada say they're being subjected to hate. And that's because the Prime Minister cannot get his symbols right. Here's what a swastika looks like, what they call the swastika. It's a symbol of divinity and spirituality, not just in Hinduism, but also in Buddhism and Jainism. What Trudeau and Singh were talking about is something else. The Hakenkreuz, the identity of the Nazi party of Adolf Hitler. Some people in the Freedom Convoy are Nazi sympathizers carrying the symbol and the flag, and they can be easily identified. But Hindu groups in Canada say Trudeau's misrepresentation has put their community in danger. One of them is the Hindu Pact, Hindu Policy Research and Advocacy Collective. Let me share with you what they've told Justin Trudeau. We believe this misrepresentation will lead to hate crimes against Hindus and Sikhs. In the past month alone, 6 Hindu temples were vandalized and looted in Canada. Hindu temples have been on target in Trudeau's Canada. The first incident, in fact, happened in November last year. 2 temples were targeted in Brampton, the Hindu Sepehr temple and Sri Jagannath temple. And in recent months, a number of temples have been vandalized. In at least 6 temples, cash from donation boxes and ornaments from Hindu gods have been stolen. All these robberies have happened in a span of 10 days. There is alarm in the Hindu community of Canada. Here's what an official at a temple said, and I'm quoting again. Whoever is getting this thing done to our temples, they're doing bad to the community, and our government should put their hand in and take out this kind of incident. That's what he said, I'm quoting. Not sure which government he's referring to, the Canadian or the Indian. But will the government, the Indian government, speak on this? Will it express concern about the safety of Indians in Canada? Justin Trudeau did not hesitate in preaching India during the farmer protest. He called them a matter of concern for Canada. Now, his indecision and disappearing act has put democracy in peril. The Freedom Convoy has snowballed into an anti-Trudeau movement and left Canada further divided.
They are amongst us now and look exactly like anyone who is of white European heritage. Their major issue is they cannot allow any reptilian DNA primate hybrids to leave Earth because of the susceptibility to reptilian mind control. Over the past 100 years, or so, Europe and much of the world has experienced a collectivist philosophy and system of governance called socialism or communism or fascism. I am going to digress a bit. Think of the many wars that have been fought on Earth over the last 300 years. There was the First Worldwide War between France, Holland, Spain and England, which included the American Revolution, lots of fighting in the Caribbean and India. Then there was the Napoleonic Wars, the American Civil War, the War of 1870, the Spanish-American War, WW1 and WW2. The odd thing is that most of the fighting and blood spilled came from Europeans or European colonists. The reason for this is that the reptilians did not have a mind control capability over the Pleiadian human warrior colonists and engineered ways to kill off as many of them as possible in wars and diseases.
In 1209, Pope Innocent III decided to use the machinery of crusading against enemies at home. Who was he worried about? Heretics. Pope Innocent had his sights set on the Albigensians. This group did have some very strange ideas, but they also had a strict moral program and called out corruption in the church. Some called them the good Christians.
The church authorities didn't think they were so good. They tried convincing the Albigensians of the error of their ways. And when that failed, Pope Innocent decided a military solution would be better. Just wipe them out.
The Albigensian Crusade is, in many ways, an anomaly in medieval Europe. It is shocking to people at the time. The war is exceptionally brutal, exceptionally bloody. And I don't mean that as a modern person talking about the Middle Ages. I mean, again, people in the moment point out how brutal and bloody the Albigensian Crusade is.
Take what happened here, in Beziers. The Pope's army arrived and demanded the town surrender its heretics, a list of about 200 people. The townspeople refused.
The Crusaders stormed the city, but there was no way of telling the difference between faithful Catholics and heretical Albigensians. So they asked the Pope's representative what they should do, and he's supposed to have replied, "Kill them all. God will know his own."
The soldiers slaughtered everyone in the town, reportedly about 20,000 people, men, women, and children. These Knights of Christ broke down the doors of churches to kill those who'd sought sanctuary inside, and then burnt the town to the ground.
Strangely enough, the bloodthirsty campaigns of the Albigensian Crusade didn't achieve their goal. So the Church adopted a new approach, one many people might consider even more sinister: the Inquisitions.
Modern DNA testing has been going on, and the geneticists have developed haplogroups that only appears in Pleiadians, and to an extent in the countries invaded by Pleiadians such as England, Ireland and Northern Europe. This DNA is not shared by any other group of people on planet Earth. Scientists conclude that the blue-eyed family spread out from an area north of the Black Sea, around 6,000 years ago. These people were among the Proto-Indo-European Aryans, who subsequently spread agriculture into Western Europe, and later rode horses into Iran and India. Following the ending of the last Ice Age, many Europeans inherited this rare gene associated with blue-eyed people, that differentiated them from the rest of the human races. Indeed, it appears that the elite and nobility, that organized the earliest known agricultural civilizations, all shared this trait, seemingly coming from the same bloodline. When we look to ancient Egypt, arguably one of the world's oldest known civilizations, we find many blonde and fair-haired mummies. Another one of the oldest documented civilizations, credited with having the first writing, schools, courts, and many other firsts, were the ancient Sumerians of Mesopotamia. The ancient Sumerians thought that blue eyes were a sign of the gods. The Sumerian nobility were blue-eyed and fair-haired, as most of their busts show. Gautama Buddha's physical body is traditionally regarded as having the 32 characteristics of a great man. These 32 characteristics are described throughout the Pali Canon, and are also regarded as being present in Chakravartin kings as well. Number 29 on this ancient list is eyes deep blue. 2,000 years ago, a mysterious and little-known civilization, with a blue-eyed elite, ruled the northern coast of Peru. Its people were called the Mush. They built huge pyramids that still dominate the surrounding countryside, some well over 100 feet tall. Archaeologists working at Peru's Huacapuclana ruins recently pulled a blue-eyed mummy from an ancient tomb thought to be from the ancient Wari culture that flourished before the Incas. Piercing blue eyes undimmed by the passing of 1,300 years, this is the Lady of the Mask, a mummy with striking blue eyes, whose discovery could reveal the secrets of a lost culture at the Huacapuclana pyramid located in Lima, Peru. It is the first time a tomb from the region's Wari culture has been discovered intact and gives historians the chance to learn about the ancient pre-Incan civilizations. The Lord of Sipan's tomb is held by some archaeologists to be one of the most important archaeological discoveries in this region of the world in the last 30 years, as the main tomb was found intact and untouched by thieves. He was called Viracocha by the Incas. He and in some cases his men were described as being tall, bearded, with white skin, and beautiful emerald blue eyes. The question really is, why did we go from having nobody on Earth with blue eyes 10,000 years ago, to having 20 or 40% of Europeans having blue eyes now? The Sumerian civilization is the oldest known human civilization on Earth. Their gods were called the Anunnaki, which in Sumerian means those who from heaven to earth came. It blossomed out almost overnight, around 3800 BC, in Mesopotamia, the land between the two rivers, Tigris and Euphrates, and came to a sudden end in 2024 BC, when it was laid waste by a deadly radioactive cloud, brought by easterly winds from the Sinai Peninsula, where according to some ancient records, a nuclear war took place. The huge black scar in the face of the Earth, in the southeastern part of the Sinai Peninsula, and the blackened stones that show signs of being instantly melted by extreme intense heat. There is more evidence. Higher than normal levels of radioactivity have been found in the Dead Sea. The site of Sodom and Gomorrah have been nuked at the same time. And in the land of Sumer itself, a recent study has found that around the time of the destruction of Sumer, there was a sudden climate change there, the nature of which is consistent with a nuclear fallout. The Sumerian civilization disappeared around 2000 BC, just as suddenly as it appeared. It is clear that its fall was very tragic, as many Sumerian lamentation texts have been found bewailing the destruction and desolation of various Sumerian cities. All these lamentation texts blame the destruction on the use of some weapons of terror and some great deadly cloud. The detailed descriptions of their effects leave no doubt that the weapons of terror were nuclear weapons. The intercontinental ballistic missiles that dropped nuclear warheads on Sodom and Gomorrah were launched from Africa and belonged to the Anunnaki. The Sumerian-era epic lists 5 cities, along with the spaceport in the Sinai, that were nuked, Sodom and Gomorrah being only 2 of them. The Bible goes into more detail as to what was actually going on. History had it that, following the invasion of the Pleiadians, helped by Abram, the Anunnaki met in their assembly, and decided to nuke the spaceport, so that it did not fall into the hands of the Pleiadians. Armed with proper understanding of who the ancient gods really were, we can now properly address the question of why do we not see them and their advanced technologies among us, and why have we not seen them over the past few centuries? Where did they go? Zechariah Sitchin does not answer, or even address this question, and for the most part ends his Earth Chronicles in 2024 B. After centuries of bitter warfare, the Pleiadians were winning until a nuclear attack by the Anunnaki, mentioned before. The Middle East was lost to the Anunnaki. The Pleiadians had to evacuate to Western Europe. Where did the Anunnaki go? They settled in Eastern Europe. They became the gods of some ancient European people. Rome appears to be yet another culture under the aegis of the Anunnaki. The Roman gods were copied from the Greek ones, and the Greeks were Anunnaki. The head of the Roman pantheon is generally thought of as Jupiter, a parallel of the Greek Zeus, whom I have determined to be the same person as the Hittite Baal and the Semitic Shamash, the commander of space operations of the Anunnaki. The Anunnaki were forced out of the Middle East first, then out of Europe. Their last home on Earth was ancient Russia, and when it was Christianized, the Anunnaki gods had to take off in their rockets and leave the Earth. Many of them probably went back to their home planet, but others may be closer, no farther than the moon. Stalin's father was a Knyaz. Knyazi were the olden Russian nobility stemming from pre-Tsarist ancient Russia. They probably allied with the Anunnaki to take Russia back. Muslims recognize Allah as the moon god, and there is plenty of moon symbolism in Islam. Besides the general evidence for an active non-human base on the moon, it is widely rumored in certain circles that the US astronauts received very little welcome from the operators of this base. Simply put, the Yankees were told that they are not welcome on the moon and should go back to where they came from. The moon program was hastily abandoned as a result. I also suspect that the Soviets never went there not because they couldn't, but because they already knew. If the moon base is under Anunnaki command, as I suspect, their lack of hospitality to Uncle Sam's ambassadors is quite understandable. The present-day American imperialism, hated by the rest of the world, is almost certainly of Anunnaki origin. Sitchin has shown that Isis was the great-great-granddaughter of Anunnaki leader Enki. Enki led a separate faction of the Anunnaki that I believe was partially Syrian, as Enki's mother was apparently from Sirius, the brightest star as seen from Earth. It seems like several attempts were made at recovering the Earth long after it was taken over by the Pleiadians, and all other Anunnaki fled in their spaceships. As it turns out, there is a very well-known city on Earth that still bears her name. That city is Paris. Paris was founded around 300–200 BCE, and its original Latin name is Par-Isis, the city of Isis. In light of this knowledge and of the fact that France was a major center of the Enlightenment, coupled with some other curious facts, for example that Josephine, Napoleon's wife, considered herself almost a reincarnation of Isis.
In the Hindu religion, again evidence can be found of the Pleiades. Hindu scriptures declare that our Earth is but one in a series of several planets. In all there are said to be 14 planets, or worlds, out of which 6 are above Earth, and 7 are below the Earth. According to Hindu scriptures, there are 15 planets in all. Also in the well-known Gayatri mantra, 7 worlds are mentioned. The Mundaka Upanishad refers 7 tongues and 7 forms of Agni. It is also believed that during our spiritual practice 7 energies awake. The mother goddess, Dugra, manifested herself into 7 forms during a fight with one of the demons called Raktabia.
The earliest known depiction of the Pleiades is likely a northern German Bronze Age artifact known as the Nebra sky disk, dated to approximately 1600 BC. Today, the Pleiades are officially considered part of the constellation of Taurus the Bull. Most people view the Pleiades as located on the shoulder of the bull, some on the neck and some others on the back. Jews and Arabians place the Pleiades as the rump of Aries, the ram, which is the constellation to the east of them. The Hindus place them on the head of the bull. The rest of the ancient world seems to view the Pleiades as a separate constellation. The Berbers living in the desert of North Africa call the Pleiades Kat-i-Hid. The name means in Berber, daughters of the night. Other Berber tribes call this star cluster Amana, meaning the guide. The Celt religion, a prominent zoomorphic deity type is the divine bull, Tarvos Tyrannius. Bull with 3 cranes is pictured on reliefs from the Cathedral of Trier, Germany, and Notre Dame in Paris. In Sumerian mythology, Marduk is the bull of Utu. In Hinduism, Shiva's steed is Nandi, the bull. The sacred bull survives in constellation Taurus. To the Anunnaki cultures, the bull was usually seen as being tamed or subdued or even sacrificed. In Mesopotamia, the Sumerian epic of Gilgamesh depicts the killing of the bull of heaven. In Crete, bulls were a central theme in Minoan civilization, with bull heads and bull horns used as symbols in Gnostis Palace. Minoan frescoes depict bull leaping, in which participants of both sexes vaulted over the bulls by grasping their horns. In Cyprus, bull masks made from real skulls were worn in rites. Bull mask terracotta figurines and Neolithic bull horn stone altars have been found in Cyprus. Zeus took over the earlier roles and in the form of the bull that came forth from the sea, abducted high-born Europa and brought her to Crete. The religious practices of the Roman Empire of the 2nd and 4th centuries included a bull being sacrificed for the well-being of the people and the state. The cult reliefs of the Roman Mithric mysteries depict Mithra's killing of a bull. The practice of bullfighting on the Iberian Peninsula and in southern France are connected. Various bull figures in the mythologies of ancient Sumer, Akkad, Assyria, Babylon, Egypt, Greece and Rome. Bulls also appear on the seal of the Indus Valley civilization. It was explicitly stated in the Book of Numbers that God, Elohim, had the horns of the wild ox, and his throne was guided by human-headed bulls called cherubim. In fact, bulls were set up as golden images of Yahweh in the 2 rival temples of the 10 northern tribes of Israel. This was scandalous in the eyes of the southern Judean who made up no molten images of God. No greater zealot for Yahweh's integrity can be found in the Old Testament than the prophet Amos, and yet all the evidence shows that Amos tolerated the worship of his God in the form of a golden bull.
The association the Australian Aborigines drew between the Pleiades and the bird is widespread. Many other peoples associate the Pleiades with birds, call them the 7 doves. In the Bible, doves are associated with spirits. The ancients associated Taurus with the Noahic flood, and Pleiades with the ark, again tying the constellation to the dove, and indirectly to the heavenly Jerusalem. In the Coverdale Bible of 1535, the margin note to the reference in Job reads, "These 7 stars, the clock hen with her chicks," reflecting the then common name for the Pleiades among the North Central and Western Europeans. The Japanese also saw the Pleiades as a hen and her chicks. The Samoans know the Pleiades as the bird of paradise, the first hint of a link between the Pleiades and paradise. The Pleiades are associated with the Feast of the Dead on November 1st, as celebrated by the Roman Catholic Church in Europe, the Celtic Druids, and the natives of Peru. In Australia, the event sparked a 3-day celebration in honor of the Pleiades. When we look at the lore associated, worldwide with the Pleiades, we find there threads of all the elements connected with the Church in the Holy Bible. There can be little doubt that the original pattern, perhaps dating back to Adam, who was the first astronomer among Jewish and early Christian writers, is at least in part preserved in the world's myths and tales of the Pleiades. We find then, in the Pleiades, a strong type of the Church of God. Revelation 1:20 says, "The mystery of the 7 stars which thou sawest in my right hand, and the 7 golden candlesticks." The 7 stars are the angels of the 7 churches, and the 7 candlesticks which thou sawest are the 7 churches. Today we call ourselves by the Greek word Christian, but have we ever questioned where the term originated? And what does it mean? The New Schaffherzog Encyclopedia of Religious Knowledge confirms that the name originated outside of Christian and Jewish circles. From my studies of theology, I have learned that the figure known as Jesus was created by the Council of Nicaea in the year 325 AD, as a way to bring together all of the Yeshua cults via Emperor Constantine. The council added the supranational abilities of Mithra, Horus, and Osiris to the Jesus entity they created, and from that point forward, Christianity was created. The Bible has missing chapters such as the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, the Book of Numbers and the Book of the Wars of Jehovah, so one must question why any books would be eliminated and why. What we know through these missing books. For example, when the Israelites idolized the golden calf when Moses went to the mountains, it symbolized the age of Taurus. When Moses blew on the ram's horn, it symbolized the age of Aries. When Jesus fed the masses with 2 fish, it symbolized the age of Pisces. When Jesus said to follow the man bearing the pitcher of water, it symbolized the age of Aquarius. The King James Version of the Bible wasn't written until the year 1611, and was edited by Rosicrucian and Freemason, Sir Francis Bacon. With ties to secret societies, is it possible that the truth was twisted and/or encrypted? What we do know is that there is a Christian Bible on the main floor of any Freemason lodge. The story of Jesus was created by the Church as a means of subservience, control, and conformity to religion and government. While it's definitely possible that an entity with supranational abilities existed, the name Christian was a term employed to describe one who was an initiate, and understood the inner meaning of the Greek and Roman mystery religions. Thus, the early followers of Jesus refused to be called Christian. We find no less than 12 mythical historical personages before the advent of Christ, who are said to have suffered crucifixion, death and to have risen from the dead. Among them are, Krishna, Vithoba, Osiris, Attis, Indra, Prometheus, Mithra, Dionysius, Croesus, Aesculapius, Adonis, Apollonius of Tyana. Several of these figures are said to have been crucified at the spring equinox, and to have risen on the 3rd day. The date of Christmas was purposely fixed on December 25th, to push into the background the great festival of the sun god, and Epiphany on January 6th to supplant an Egyptian festival of the same day. The Easter ceremonies rivaled the pagan spring festivals. The religious art of the Christians continued the pagan art of the preceding generations. The Christian representations of the Madonna and Child are clearly the continuation of the representations of Isis and her son suckling her breast.
Robert Bigelow, founder of the military contractor Bigelow Aerospace. The Las Vegas tycoon spoke with 60 Minutes in May.
Do you imagine that in our space travels we will encounter other forms of intelligent life?
You don't have to go anywhere.
You can find it here.
Yeah.
Where exactly?
It's just like right under people's noses. Oh my gosh. Wow.
Robert Bigelow, founder of the military contractor Bigelow Aerospace. The Las Vegas tycoon spoke with 60 Minutes in May.
Do you imagine that in our space travels we will encounter other forms of intelligent life?
You don't have to go anywhere.
You can find it here.
Yeah.
Where exactly?
It's just like right under people's noses. Oh my gosh. Wow.